This is a Vectis 3D models video, and this is an instruction video for the Baxter motor kit. This is an additional part, so if you want to purchase one to add to your kit, you can do. It can be a little bit difficult if you don't know what you're doing, so if you're not too sure, always ask for advice or come to me and ask me directly. So this kit is made up of a few bits and pieces. You can see in front of us here, top left is the motor mount. On the right we have the Firebox back head, and then in front of the motor mount we have the motor itself, which is the double shaft Coreless motor. And then in front of that we have the flywheel, the brass flywheel, and also a brass adapter for the shaft of the motor. This brings it up from 1mm to 1.5mm. Now you'll need some tools to work on the old motor. Obviously you have to remove the old worm off of the old shaft. So there's a few ways of doing this, either a wheel puller or a gear puller. An old-fashioned method is a pair of pliers, a vise, a piece of metal rod which is about 1mm, 1.2 maybe, and a hammer. And it's just easy to get the pliers around the bottom of the worm, over a vise or over a gap in the vise, put the pin in the top and hit it with a hammer, and it did come off very easily. If you do have all the right tools to work on that and take it off properly with a gear puller, then you're better than me. Other things you may need to use is a Dremel disc cutter or a junior hacksaw. This is to reduce the height of the worm due to the collar it has underneath, between the motor and the actual worm. It's too tall to fit on this one, and how it's being fitted, it's not quite how it should be fitted, but it's the only way to make it work. So you need a needle file, a disc cutter or a junior hacksaw just to trim it down a little bit. Now I mentioned a vise. You probably need a vise to squeeze the adapter shaft inside the worm itself. You may need a 1.5mm drill bit just to clean out the shaft of the worm itself, and possibly a 1mm drill just to clean the center of the adapter. That being said, you probably don't need too much glue. You do need to glue the actual flywheel on the opposite end, but before doing this, do make sure you solder on all the wires, but you need to solder on the contact terminals. That being said, there is a few extras you can add if you wish, but we'll talk you through that as I get up to that point in time. With that all said, this kit is approximately between £15 and £20. I haven't quite figured out all the costs yet, but I'm working on it. But it's between those 2 points. So with that said, we'll get on and show you the removal of the motor worm, and then we'll carry on trimming it down, fitting it out and adding it onto this motor, and then hopefully testing it. See you in the next bit. Okay, on the workbench with the sort of finished prototype from what you saw on the last body build video. Now this is one completed motor. Haven't glued the actual flywheel on yet, but you can see this is what we're aiming for. So this is a worm off of the old motor, which was the donor, and this has been squeezed onto the shaft. It's got the adapter on one end, and I've also marked whereabouts it needs to be glued. Now there are contacts on this top surface where the wires will need to go to, and that will be done at some point when it's all mounted up and sorted. So that's what we're aiming for. So we'll remove that. Now, this is the original motor. Now, as mentioned on the intro, the shaft itself is not very long on this motor at all. You can see it just here. Now that was quite easy to remove on this one, but it's not always the case. I have another motor where it's actually grooved and got grips around where the worm is. So this one was quite easy to get rid of, and I think this one's a dapple version. So for a dapple version it's quite easy to remove, but a Hornby version is a bit more difficult. So I've tried various ways of getting the worms off in the past, including heating them up, trying to remove them. This one I used some pliers of a normal vise and just managed to get a pin in the top and hit it, and it just dropped out very easily. Others will need a bit more force, which you can get gear pullers and wheel pullers, but it's very difficult to get behind. This is the worm, as you can see here. It's very difficult to get behind this part of the worm because there's not much distance between the end of this and the end of the shaft or part of the motor, the bearing on the motor. So it can be quite tricky. So it's up to you how you want to do it, but there are my 3 or 4 options. So this has been removed already, as I said, with the pliers. The motor is still good, so it can be used for something else. Now this needs quite a bit of work. So this section, which is basically the shoulder, this needs to be removed. So about was that about 4 mil? That needs to be removed and cut away. So I'm going to do that with this cutter from a Dremel. If you don't have a Dremel, use a junior hacksaw and a vise will be very helpful. Do not hold it in the vise via the teeth, it will damage the teeth on the gear or the worm, and it will be completely unusable and you cannot get a spare. So hold it like this and cut it downwards. That's the best way I would go about it, and then turn it over and then cut again downwards to remove it. After that it'll probably need some cleaning up, so a 1.5mm drill, just clean up the cut end. You may want to just file down the other end just to give it a little bit more room, but hopefully with the designed flywheel for this motor kit, it will allow it to raise up slightly by about 1mm, giving you a bit more room. A normal flywheel with square edges with very small chamfers doesn't actually fit that well in the actual Firebox, so that's why I produced my own. So that needs to be modified, which I will go and do now, and join me back on the other workbench after it's been cut, filed and cleaned up. Okay, on the workbench with the worm, which has been cut and sliced, as you can see here, that's one end, and this is the cut end, which I will be using. Now the shaft hole has been re-drilled and checked at 1.5mm. It's also been cleaned up and filed. As I said, I've used a cutting disc on a Dremel, which you can see just here. That's what I used to cut it. So the next bit really, to remove that, we'll need to put the adapter into the hole to bring it down to 1mm. So I'll do that now with the use of a vise and just ease it in slightly. If it's over tight, you can just sort of clean it up with a piece of emery paper or wet and dry and just easily squeeze it in, but it still needs to be tight. So I'll do that now on the vise, and we'll check that with you shortly. Yep, looks good. I just need to clean off the end, which is still slightly proud, of course. But that's all in, ready to go on the motor once it's all cleaned up. Okay, so back on the other workbench, you can see I've cleaned up the worm on the end here, on the other end as well. what I've done is just sort of chamfered the entrance to the hole with a slightly bigger drill bit, so it's a little bit clearer and easier to get in. The 1mm hole in the centre is absolutely fine. In fact, it is not terribly tight, which I'll just show you, so you can just easily put that on. There's no movement on the shaft, it's just quite loose, so it's not grabbing, so you will need to put a little bit of glue around the shaft, not too much because you do not want it to leak into the bearings of the motor and jam the whole thing up. So I will get this ready to go together, and then what we'll do is we'll move on to the cab and the actual motor mount itself, and then we'll position the motor on the motor mount, and then we'll get the heights and everything else sorted so we know if the flywheel can go in the right place on top. And once that's in place, then we can go forwards onto wiring the motor up and showing you a few extra little bits and pieces which you could use as well. So looking at the back of the Baxter model or kit, this is our unpainted motor mount. You can paint this black if you wish. I have one just here, it's already been painted. This is just normal spray paint, normal matte black, and it goes in this way with the flat section up against the back of the cab. So if I just remove the wires, this is a slightly later chassis on this one, so it has some slightly thinner gauge wire. So you may need to clean the whole of this or clean the underneath of this just to make sure it fits in quite nice and securely. So put that in there like so. There we go, nice and tight, and that's in there like so. Let's bring the light forwards. Now you can see behind as well, I haven't filled the boiler full of lead shot or I can't remember what it's called, liquid gravity. Now I'm going to suggest a couple of things before I move on with this. Depending how big your digital chip is, if you're digital, you could possibly fit it in the side here, or you could run a wire or wires from here through to the smoke box. Now you could fill up the boiler up to the top of the silos if you like, where the screws for the chassis and the body go into, so it won't affect the screws if you want to. So you could fill with lead shot up to the top of that, leaving a nice top section to fit through wires to the front of the locomotive. Now again, you might want to put sound in the front as well if that's really what you want. I mean, there's a reasonable size on there. What I'll do is I'll add some measurements for the internals of the smoke box if you wish, and the internals of this area here. So that's all in place. Now you can glue this motor mount in place once you've painted it, of course, and the whole model's been painted. We'll pretend it is for a moment. So I'll glue that in place with a little dab of maybe some super glue or some general purpose glue. Let that go off, and then you can use your motor with its worm on the end. And it'll just pop through the hole, and hopefully it will, there you go, you can see it's engaging with the gear because the motor's going up and down. So once you've got that sorted, glued in place, then we can go on to making sure the motor is in the right place. So you can glue the motor or mark the motor so it's in the right position. So just a small follow-up to the Pug motor kit as well. Things have been changing all the time, and small changes, modifications. So the motor mount that you've seen in the video just prior would have been this one. However, as I've suggested in the video, it's just a little bit difficult to do this if you're not quite sure what you're doing. Obviously with a motor and the position of the worm, it's quite critical where you're going to put it to make sure it connects and drives properly. So I've revised the motor mount here. You can see it's approximately a couple of mil taller. So this is to help you get it in the right position. So when you glue your motor in, once you've painted it black and stopped the light fading through it and all that kind of thing, primed it, painted it, etc. When you mount your motor, which I have one here, which will go on Baxter B in the background, you can see here I've changed a few things. And what this will do is, now you glue your motor so at the top, the black piece of plastic on the top of the motor is level with the top of this motor mount, which means you don't have to measure it all up, guess, second guess, make sure it's off the bottom of the keeper plate, etc, etc. So it should be at the right height and the right place. The wires for the motor go through either side, pop out the back, and solder onto the terminals out the side, keeping them out the way hopefully. So that's where we're at with that, and that's what you'll get in your kit. So that's a small addition and a small change on the motor mount, just to help you get your motor in the right place. So you'll look forward to that in your kit, so just to help you along a little bit and make it a little bit more simple. First, obviously you've got your back head as well. Always paint this before adding it in. On the one I'm going to fit on this model, I've already painted the insides so it won't have any light bleed. Now there are some extra bits if you wish to add them. You can see there's a square on here with 2 holes at the top. Now if you wish, you can add a firebox flicker. Now I run DC and it's very difficult to get a firebox flicker on DC, so I found these, which are Train Tech SL40 Smart Light, real firebox or fire effect. Put them in buildings, under barrels, or even in locomotives. What I do with this is I take off the thicker wires and put in some thinner wires, so Dakota wire mainly, so red and black. That gets wired through to the top of the motor and hopefully will work when the power is on. So I'll get on and fit the firebox flicker, and then I will solder all the wires onto the motor and see how we get on, and also fit the motor with the flywheel as well. So back from the other workbench, or the running test workbench, you could see that the model was actually running well, not too tight and not too stiff as it was moving, and reasonably quiet considering it was on a big box, so it was louder than normal. And also you could see that we have now put the shell over the motor. I needed to make the hole slightly bigger on the top. So I'll have to go into the CAD and change that, but overall it's worked quite well. As you've also seen in the video, I've also installed the lights, soldered that all together, which was a bit of a faff. To follow up on the bit I've mentioned before about the order of putting it in. What I did was basically soldered the wires onto the top of the motor, then I dropped the motor down, so took the keeper plate off, took the wheel off, so dropped the motor down, put some glue around the inside of the motor mount. I've got one just here. So I put some general all-purpose glue just around here, and then on the underneath as well, on the underside, put some glue on the front back part of the motor, silver glue in the front part as well, and then slid it back up to the mark on the motor, and that sits nice and perfectly in the right place. Waited for the glue to go off before, well, I did put the flywheel on top as well, I forgot to mention that, and then put some glue around the top of the actual flywheel, so that would stay in one place as well, as it's not quite tight enough. So motor in, solder, drop the motor down, put some glue around the motor mount on the inside, then as you pull it back up, put the flywheel on the top of the motor, sliding it in position. Do not glue it in place until you have everything absolutely dry, and then glue the flywheel on top with a small drop, I mean a very small drop of super glue or all-purpose glue, or possibly Aerodite if you wish, and that should be absolutely fine. And running qualities were pretty good considering how big or small the flywheel is, but it ran well. It's got more light bleed than a Hornby carriage, but at the end of the day it's just a prototype, and it shows it does work. So all that in mind, I will glue the rest of the parts on the back of the cab and the roof, and we'll give it another run and finish this video off with a few more clips. And these kits will be available on Made Me website when the top of the kit and the rest of the kit is available. Thanks for watching, and hope to see your orders soon.